What would you do if you discovered that the strange mask hanging in your grandfather's study was connected to one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in Texas history? Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden beneath the floorboards of America's oldest homes, waiting patiently for decades until someone unwittingly uncovers the truth? In the sweltering summer of 1894, when the thermometer rarely dipped below 90 degrees even after sunset, the small farming community of Stillwater Creek, Texas, found itself at the center of a mystery that would remain unsolved for over a century. Located approximately 40 miles southeast of Dallas, Stillwater Creek had always been a place where neighbors knew one another's business, where church on Sunday was as much a social gathering as a religious obligation, and where strangers were noticed immediately. It was precisely this tight-knit nature of the community that made the events of July 1894 all the more bewildering to those who lived through them. The Blackwood homestead stood on 15 acres of land at the edge of town, a handsome two-story structure built in the 1860s by Franklin Blackwood, a former Confederate cavalry officer who had established a modestly successful cattle operation after the war. By 1894, the property had passed to his son Edward Blackwood, a widower who lived there with his teenage daughter Clara and a household staff consisting of a cook and a groundskeeper. Edward Blackwood was known throughout the county as a private but respectable businessman who had expanded his father's legacy by investing in the cotton trade that was booming throughout the region. What began as a routine repair to the Blackwood property's root cellar, a cool underground space used for storing vegetables, preserves, and other perishables before the age of modern refrigeration, would unearth a series of discoveries that would first puzzle, then horrify the residents of Stillwater Creek. According to the original records filed with the Stillwater Creek Sheriff's Department on July 14, 1894, Edward Blackwood had hired a local carpenter, Thomas Whitfield, to repair the door to the root cellar, which had apparently been damaged during a recent thunderstorm. What should have been a straightforward job took an unexpected turn when Whitfield discovered that the damage had not been caused by weather at all, but appeared to be the result of someone attempting to break into the cellar from the outside. "I've worked with wood all my life, and I know the difference between water damage and tool marks," Whitfield stated in his deposition to Sheriff James Morrison. Someone had taken a pry bar or similar implement to that door, and with considerable force. What's more curious is that Mr. Blackwood had 3 separate padlocks on that cellar door, which struck me as excessive for storing turnips and potatoes. Sheriff Morrison's initial investigation found no evidence of theft, and with no other suspicious circumstances immediately apparent. The matter was noted but not pursued further. Edward Blackwood dismissed the incident as likely the work of hungry vagrants passing through the area, and had Whitfield install a new, sturdier door with even more substantial locks. The case might have ended there, filed away as a minor attempted burglary, if not for the events that transpired 3 days later. On the evening of July 17th, Clara Blackwood, Edward's 16-year-old daughter, failed to return home after visiting a friend in town. By midnight, with no sign of the girl and with a summer storm approaching, Edward Blackwood roused several neighbors to form a search party. They combed the 3-mile road between town and the Blackwood property without success. From the personal journal of Martha Wilkins, Clara's friend, dated July 18, 1894. "I cannot sleep knowing Clara is still missing. Father joined the search parties again at first light. I keep thinking about our conversation yesterday before she left. Clara had been acting strangely all week, jumpy and distracted. When I asked what was troubling her, she leaned close and whispered that she had heard sounds coming from their root cellar late at night. She said her father forbade her from ever going near it, which seemed odd as she had mentioned gathering preserves from there many times before. But what truly frightened me was when she described waking 2 nights ago to find her father returning to the house near dawn, his clothes soiled with dirt as if he'd been digging, and carrying something wrapped in canvas. She couldn't see what it was, but said it was approximately the size of a human head. The search for Clara Blackwood continued for 5 days, involving nearly every able-bodied man in Stillwater Creek and several neighboring communities. On the morning of July 22nd, Sheriff Morrison, acting on information from one of his deputies, who had observed Edward Blackwood making repeated trips to and from the root cellar at unusual hours, obtained permission from the county judge to search the Blackwood property thoroughly. What they discovered in that root cellar would haunt the dreams of everyone involved for years to come. The official report filed by Sheriff Morrison described the scene with clinical detachment, though later accounts from those present paint a more disturbing picture. The root cellar, approximately 15 feet square with a packed earth floor and stone walls, had been converted into something else entirely. The expected shelves of preserved foods occupied only a small portion of the space. The remainder contained a table fashioned from rough-hewn oak, various surgical implements arranged with meticulous precision, and a collection of glass jars containing specimens that the sheriff declined to describe in detail in his official report. Most disturbing, however, was the discovery of a trap door in the floor of the cellar, concealed beneath a rug and leading to a crawl space that had been expanded into a crude chamber, approximately 8 feet by 6 feet. It was here that they found evidence of recent digging, though whatever might have been buried there had been removed. Of Clara Blackwood there was no sign, but hanging on the wall of the cellar was a mask, not a typical carnival or theatrical mask, but one crafted from what appeared to be tanned leather, stitched together with catgut and adorned with symbols that none present could identify. The mask had no eye holes, suggesting it was not meant to be worn, at least not by the living. "In all my years of law enforcement, I have never witnessed such a scene," wrote Sheriff Morrison in a private letter to the Texas Rangers requesting assistance. "The cellar contained items of such a disturbing nature that I hesitate to describe them fully, lest this correspondence fall into the wrong hands. Suffice it to say that Edward Blackwood has been engaged in activities far beyond the understanding of decent folk. Most alarmingly, records found on the premises suggest these activities may not be isolated to Stillwater Creek. Edward Blackwood was nowhere to be found on the property. His horse was still in the stable, suggesting he had fled on foot or by some other means of transportation. A statewide manhunt was initiated, with his description circulated to law enforcement agencies throughout Texas and neighboring states. The investigation took another unexpected turn when authorities discovered a hidden compartment in Blackwood's study containing correspondence between him and individuals in New Orleans, Boston, and San Francisco. The letters, written in a cipher that took authorities weeks to decode, suggested Blackwood was part of a network of individuals engaged in practices that the investigating officers could only describe as unnatural and contrary to God's law. From the decoded letters, one passage stands out, written by Blackwood to an associate identified only as the professor in Boston. The work continues despite setbacks. "The materials you sent have proven invaluable in my explorations of the threshold between states of being. The mask in particular has properties that defy rational explanation. When placed upon the subject, even after cessation of life functions, a certain animation can be observed for up to 6 hours. I have documented these observations meticulously and will forward my findings once I have completed the current series of experiments. My daughter grows suspicious, however, and may pose a complication that will need to be addressed." As news of the discoveries at the Blackwood property spread, the community of Stillwater Creek found itself divided. Many refused to believe that Edward Blackwood, a respected member of the community and regular churchgoer, could be involved in anything sinister. Others, particularly those who had glimpsed the contents of the root cellar before it was sealed off by authorities, would never look at their neighbor the same way again. The case grew colder with each passing week. Despite the efforts of local law enforcement and the Texas Rangers, Edward Blackwood had vanished without a trace. The search for Clara continued without success, and by the autumn of 1894, hope of finding her alive had dwindled to nothing. Then, on October 30th, 1894, a breakthrough occurred in the most unexpected place. In the town of Nacogdoches, approximately 160 miles east of Stillwater Creek, a local physician, Dr. Samuel Holcomb, was called to attend to a man who had collapsed at a boarding house. The man, who had registered under the name Thomas Gray, had been staying at the establishment for several weeks, keeping to himself and rarely venturing out during daylight hours. From Dr. Holcomb's medical journal. Upon examining the patient, I observed several peculiarities that roused my suspicion. His hands bore chemical burns consistent with someone who works regularly with formaldehyde and other preserving agents. More notably, when I removed his shirt to listen to his heart, I discovered an unusual tattoo on his left shoulder, a stylized mask surrounded by symbols similar to those I had read about in the newspaper accounts of the Stillwater Creek incident. The patient was delirious with fever, murmuring incoherently about the threshold and the work continuing. I administered a sedative and, while he was unconscious, took the liberty of examining his personal effects. Among them, I found a small leather-bound journal containing detailed anatomical drawings, unlike any I have encountered in medical literature, along with references to experiments that turned my stomach. I am certain this man is Edward Blackwood, and have sent word to Sheriff Morrison in Stillwater Creek. By the time the authorities arrived in Nacogdoches, however, the man had fled, leaving behind most of his possessions, including the journal that Dr. Holcomb had discovered. The journal provided new insights into Blackwood's activities and mindset, but raised even more disturbing questions. Entries dating back to 1891 detailed Blackwood's growing obsession with ancient beliefs concerning the preservation of consciousness after death. He wrote of corresponding with obscure scholars across the country and even traveling to New Orleans to meet with a Haitian practitioner of Vodou who had allegedly mastered techniques for binding spirits to physical objects. The final pages of the journal contained frantic, barely legible writings about a breakthrough Blackwood believed he had achieved. It works. God help me, it works. The mask accepts the essence if applied within 6 minutes. The body may expire, but something remains. Something can be preserved and transferred. Clara will understand now. She will be part of something greater than this brief, mundane existence. The threshold can be crossed in both directions. We are so close to understanding the true nature of consciousness. As 1894 gave way to 1895, the case remained officially unsolved. The Blackwood property stood abandoned, the root cellar sealed with concrete by order of the county judge. Clara Blackwood was legally declared deceased in absentia in January 1895, though her body was never recovered. The mask discovered in the root cellar was sent to the Smithsonian Institution for examination by experts in anthropology and religious practices, but after several months, the institution denied ever receiving the artifact. Records of its transportation exist, but its current whereabouts remain unknown. For decades, the case faded from public consciousness, becoming little more than a local legend in Stillwater Creek, a story told to frighten children on Halloween night. The town itself dwindled as the cotton industry declined, and by 1950, it was nearly abandoned, with most buildings falling into disrepair. However, the story of Edward Blackwood and the mask from the root cellar was far from over. Like many dark truths, it lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface, and reveal that what had appeared to be the end was merely the beginning of a much larger, more terrifying narrative that would span generations and cross state lines, touching lives that had no knowledge of the events in a small Texas farming community in the summer of 1894. In 1972, almost 80 years after the original incidents, a graduate student in anthropology at the University of Texas, named Michael Harrington, began researching obscure religious practices in 19th-century rural America for his doctoral dissertation. His research led him to the county records office in Dallas, where he stumbled upon the files related to the Blackwood case. Intrigued, Harrington traveled to what remained of Stillwater Creek, now little more than a cluster of dilapidated buildings and overgrown properties. The Blackwood land had changed hands multiple times over the decades, eventually being purchased by an energy company that left it undeveloped due to concerns about soil contamination from early oil exploration in the area. With permission from the current owners, Harrington conducted a preliminary archaeological survey of the property, focusing on the area where the root cellar had been located. Using ground-penetrating radar, he discovered that despite the official records stating the cellar had been filled with concrete, a void still existed beneath the ground. From Harrington's field notes, dated June 12, 1972, the concrete seal appears to have been removed at some point, possibly within a decade of its placement. Evidence suggests the cellar was accessed repeatedly over the years. Most disturbingly, I found a modern padlock on the remains of the door, modern meaning likely installed in the 1950s or 60s. Someone has been using this space long after the Blackwood case was closed. I've arranged for proper excavation equipment to arrive tomorrow. Dr. Simmons from the archaeology department has agreed to accompany me, along with 2 graduate assistants. I cannot shake the feeling that we are on the verge of uncovering something significant, not just for my dissertation, but for understanding a dark chapter in regional history that has never been properly closed. The excavation of the root cellar revealed that it had indeed been used periodically in the decades since the original case. Carbon dating of materials found in the space suggested activity as recently as 1968. Most significant among the findings was a metal box containing photographs and documents dating from the 1920s through the 1960s, all seemingly related to individuals connected by some common purpose. Among these materials was a newspaper clipping from the Dallas Morning News, dated October 31, 1949, reporting the arrest of a man named Elliot Wheeler, a professor of comparative religion at a small college in East Texas, on charges of grave robbing. The article noted that when arrested, Wheeler was wearing an unusual mask made of leather and carrying a journal containing references to Edward Blackwood, and, continuing the great work, Wheeler was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and committed to the State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where he remained until his death in 1953. Hospital records indicated that he spent his final years in near-total silence, communicating only through drawings of masks and symbols identical to those found in the Blackwood root cellar. What connected Wheeler to Blackwood, and how had he gained access to the root cellar? The materials discovered by Harrington suggested a continuous chain of individuals, spanning multiple generations, all engaged in activities stemming from Blackwood's original work. These individuals, scattered across Texas and neighboring states, appeared to share an obsession with the boundary between life and death, and the possibility of preserving consciousness beyond physical expiration. As Harrington delved deeper into his research, he began to notice unsettling patterns. Many of the individuals connected to the case had reported seeing a teenage girl in a white dress near their homes in the days before they became involved in the work. The fee description matched that of Clara Blackwood, who would have been 16 years old in 1894. More disturbing still, Harrington uncovered evidence suggesting that at least 7 people connected to the case had disappeared under mysterious circumstances between 1895 and 1970, including 2 law enforcement officers who had been involved in the original investigation. In each case, witnesses reported seeing an individual wearing what was described as a featureless leather mask in the vicinity shortly before the disappearance. Harrington's research came to an abrupt halt in August 1972, when a fire destroyed his apartment and all his research materials. Harrington himself suffered severe burns and smoke inhalation, and upon recovery, appeared to have no memory of his work on the Blackwood case. He abandoned his dissertation, changed his field of study to modern agricultural practices, and never again spoke of Edward Blackwood, the mask, or the root cellar. The case might have remained buried once more, if not for the events that began to unfold in the spring of 2021, when construction workers breaking ground for a new housing development on the outskirts of what had once been Stillwater Creek made a discovery that would reopen wounds thought long healed, and revealed that the strange case of Edward Blackwood was far from a closed chapter in Texas history. As the excavator bit into the red clay soil, the operator noticed something unusual, a flash of white against the earth. Stopping the machine, he climbed down to investigate and found what appeared to be human remains. Protocol dictated an immediate halt to construction and notification of authorities. The county medical examiner's preliminary assessment dated the remains to approximately 130 years earlier, placing them around the time of Clara Blackwood's disappearance. But it was what they found with the remains that sent a chill through everyone familiar with the old case. A leather mask, remarkably preserved, with no eye holes and adorned with symbols that matched the descriptions from the 1894 investigation. And beside the remains, a modern leather wallet containing a driver's license issued in 2019 to a Robert Caldwell, a name that appeared on no missing persons reports and belonged to no one local residents had ever heard of. The discovery prompted a reopening of the Blackwood case, bringing together a task force of local law enforcement, state investigators, and FBI agents specializing in cold cases. As they began to unravel the threads connecting the original events to the present day, they realized that what had appeared to be an isolated incident in a small farming community was merely the surface of something far more extensive and sinister, a conspiracy that had survived and evolved over more than a century, touching dozens of lives across multiple states. And somewhere, perhaps closer than anyone realized, the descendants of that conspiracy were watching, waiting, and continuing what Edward Blackwood had begun in his root cellar in the summer of 1894. Have you ever considered that the most terrifying mysteries are not those that remain unsolved, but those that continue to unfold across generations? What would you do if you discovered that a century-old crime was not only unresolved, but actively continuing in your own community, hidden behind the veneer of normal life? When FBI Special Agent Diana Reeves arrived in Dallas in June 2021 to lead the task force investigating the Blackwood case, she expected to find a straightforward, if unusual, historical mystery. A set of remains, likely those of Clara Blackwood, discovered with artifacts connected to her father's bizarre experiments. A case that would provide interesting forensic challenges, but ultimately lead to closure for a long-forgotten tragedy. What she found instead was evidence suggesting the case had never truly gone cold at all. The task force established its headquarters in a repurposed municipal building on the outskirts of what had once been Stillwater Creek. The town itself had been officially unincorporated in 1983, its remaining structures gradually reclaimed by nature or repurposed by the few residents who stubbornly remained in the area. The Blackwood property, now owned by Meridian Development Corporation, had been cordoned off as an active crime scene, with forensic teams methodically examining every inch of the area where the remains and the mask had been discovered. Agent Reeves, a 20-year veteran of the FBI with a specialization in ritual crimes, had been drawn to the case by the unusual elements described in the preliminary reports. In her career, she had encountered numerous instances of criminals adopting occult trappings to enhance their mystique or terrorize victims, but the Blackwood case suggested something more organized and persistent. What we're looking at here isn't the work of a single disturbed individual, Reeves explained to the assembled task force during their first briefing. The evidence suggests a continuum of activity spanning more than a century. Individuals separated by decades, somehow continuing the same pattern of behavior, using the same symbols, referencing the same objectives. This level of consistency over time typically indicates either a formal organization with a succession plan or a shared delusion that's been meticulously documented and passed down. The task force's first breakthrough came when they identified Robert Caldwell, the man whose driver's license had been found with the remains. Background checks revealed him to be a 42-year-old adjunct professor of anthropology at a community college in Houston with no criminal record. His employment records showed he had taken a sabbatical beginning in January 2021, ostensibly to conduct field research on folk religious practices in rural Texas. Interviews with Caldwell's colleagues painted a picture of a quiet, intensely private individual who had joined the faculty 3 years earlier after relocating from Boston. One colleague, Dr. Elaine Montgomery, provided particularly valuable insights. Robert was brilliant but odd. He kept to himself mostly, but about a year ago, he became almost obsessive about researching what he called consciousness transfer rituals in 19th century America. He was particularly fixated on a case from somewhere in East Texas involving a mask. I remember because he showed me a drawing of it once, a featureless leather face with strange symbols carved into it. It gave me chills just looking at it. A search of Caldwell's Houston apartment yielded a treasure trove of materials related to the Blackwood case, including copies of documents that had supposedly been destroyed in the fire that consumed Michael Harrington's research in 1972. Most significant among these was a journal containing entries that appeared to have been written by Edward Blackwood himself years after his disappearance in 1894. From the journal, dated April 3, 1899, the work continues, though I must now operate under a new identity. The mask has proven even more effective than I initially believed, allowing not just the preservation of consciousness, but its transfer between vessels. C remains my greatest success and my greatest failure. The transfer was incomplete, leaving her essence divided between the mask and her original form. She walks between worlds now, neither fully here nor fully gone. The professor believes a stronger vessel might yield better results, but suitable candidates are difficult to acquire without drawing unwanted attention. The network grows slowly but steadily. We now have associates in 5 states, all committed to piercing the veil between life and death. The implications of our work extend far beyond what I initially envisioned in my humble root cellar. The discovery of this journal sent shockwaves through the investigation. If authentic, it suggested that Edward Blackwood had not only escaped justice, but had continued his experiments for years afterward. More disturbingly, it implied that he had been part of a growing network of individuals engaged in activities that defied conventional understanding of life and death. Dr. Eliza Chen, the forensic anthropologist assigned to examine the remains found at the construction site, provided another piece of the puzzle when her analysis determined that the remains did not belong to a teenage girl, as initially suspected, but rather to an adult male who had died approximately 5 years earlier. DNA testing would later confirm these remains belonged to Martin Graves, a private investigator from Austin who had been reported missing in 2016 while investigating the disappearance of several homeless individuals in the Dallas area. But if these were not Clara Blackwood's remains, where was she? And what connection did Martin Graves have to the Blackwood case or to Robert Caldwell? The answer began to emerge when the task force located Graves's case files, stored in a climate-controlled storage unit in Austin that had been paid for anonymously since his disappearance. Among these files was a thick folder labeled simply "The Mask," containing surveillance photos of various individuals meeting at locations across Texas over a period of 3 years. One of these individuals was identified as Robert Caldwell. From Graves's case notes, dated November 12, 2015. Following 3 months of surveillance, I can confirm that the group meets on the last day of each month at rotating locations. They refer to themselves as the Threshold Society and appear to be engaged in some form of ritual practice involving a mask artifact that they transport in a specially designed case. Membership includes professionals from various fields: academics, medical practitioners, law enforcement, and at least one state government official. My client, who wishes to remain anonymous, believes they are responsible for the disappearances of at least 12 individuals over the past decade, all of whom showed no obvious vulnerabilities or risk factors that would make them typical targets for foul play. The pattern suggests careful selection rather than opportunistic victimization. I've managed to photograph the mask during one of their gatherings. It appears to be made of tanned human skin, with no eye holes and symbols, that match those described in the historical accounts of the Blackwood case from 1894. I've secured a sample of material that apparently flaked off during handling and have sent it for analysis. Accompanying these notes was a sealed envelope containing the laboratory report on the sample Graves had collected. The analysis confirmed the material was indeed human skin, approximately 120 years old, based on carbon dating, but preserved through a tanning process using chemicals consistent with those that would have been available in the late 19th century. The investigation took on new urgency when Agent Reeves discovered a pattern of disappearances along a corridor stretching from East Texas through Louisiana and into southern Arkansas, all sharing similarities with the cases Graves had been investigating. In each instance, the missing individuals had no obvious risk factors, disappeared without witness or evidence of struggle, and were last seen in areas where Threshold Society members were known to have traveled shortly before. From Agent Reeves's field journal, dated July 10, 2021, we're dealing with something unprecedented in my experience. The evidence suggests this group has been operating continuously since at least the 1890s, adapting its methods and expanding its reach while maintaining extraordinary secrecy. The question that keeps me awake at night is not just how they've remained undetected for so long, but what exactly they're trying to accomplish with these abductions and the mask. Caldwell's research materials include translations of texts dating back to ancient Mesopotamia, describing rituals for binding consciousness to objects as a means of achieving a form of immortality. The symbols on the mask match those found on artifacts from a pre-Sumerian culture that practiced what anthropologists have euphemistically termed consciousness extension rituals. More disturbing still is the possibility that Clara Blackwood was not simply another victim, but may have been the first partially successful experiment. Multiple witness accounts spanning more than a century describe seeing a young woman in 19th century dress in the vicinity of disappearances linked to the society. The consistency of these sightings across time, periods that preclude a living person maintaining such an appearance, suggests something beyond conventional explanation. The investigation gained unexpected momentum when a retired sheriff's deputy named Harold Jenkins contacted the task force after seeing a news report about the Blackwood case. Jenkins, now in his 80s, had served in Nacogdoches County in the 1970s and claimed to have encountered what he believed was the same mask described in the case. From Jenkins' recorded interview, July 15, 2021, it would have been the summer of 1974. We got a call about trespassers at the old Piedmont Cemetery outside of town. When we arrived, we found evidence of what appeared to be some kind of ritual. Candles, strange markings on several headstones, and a fresh excavation at a grave dating back to the 1930s. We set up surveillance, figuring they might return to complete whatever they had started. 3 nights later, around 2 in the morning, 4 individuals in dark clothing returned to the site. We moved in to apprehend them, but they scattered immediately. I pursued one of them through the woods for nearly half a mile before catching up. When I grabbed them, their hood fell back, and what I saw wasn't a face but a mask. Leather, no eye holes, with symbols carved into it. The strangest thing was, despite the mask having no openings, the person wearing it moved as if they could see perfectly. In the struggle that followed, I managed to pull the mask off, expecting to see the face of whoever was wearing it. Instead, there was nothing I can properly describe. Not a face, not emptiness, but something that seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, like smoke or water, but solid somehow. I dropped the mask in shock, and before I could recover, the figure had retrieved it and disappeared into the woods. I reported what I'd seen to my superior, who advised me to modify my official statement to indicate that the suspect had escaped without being clearly identified. He was concerned about the department's reputation if word got out that one of his deputies was claiming to have encountered something supernatural. But I know what I saw, and it's haunted me for nearly 50 years. Jenkins' testimony, while seemingly fantastic, aligned with statements from other witnesses who claimed to have encountered masked individuals in connection with the case. The consistent element in these accounts was the description of the mask, always of tanned leather with no eye holes, always adorned with the same symbols, and always associated with individuals who moved with unnatural certainty despite their apparent blindness. The investigation took a dramatic turn in August 2021, when forensic analysis of soil, samples from the Blackwood property, revealed trace amounts of a compound later, identified as a derivative of dimethyltryptamine, a powerful psychedelic with a history of use in various indigenous spiritual practices. The compound was found in highest concentration around the area where the root cellar had been located, and appeared to have been regularly reapplied over decades, suggesting ongoing activity at the site. Dr. Samantha Reynolds, a neurochemist consulted by the task force, provided context for this discovery. This specific derivative of DMT is fascinating because it affects the brain's perception of time and identity boundaries. Users report experiences of consciousness existing outside their physical bodies, encounters with entities they perceive as existing in parallel dimensions, and in high doses, a complete dissolution of the ego. In the context of this investigation, it's worth noting that this compound could facilitate a powerful suggestibility state where one might become convinced that their consciousness could be transferred or contained within an object like the mask. Whether there's any objective reality to such a transfer is beyond the scope of scientific verification, but the subjective experience for those involved would be extraordinarily convincing. This chemical angle provided a potential explanation for how the Threshold Society had maintained such consistent beliefs and practices across generations. The compound found at the site could create experiences that members would interpret as validation of their ideology. However, it failed to account for the physical evidence associated with the case, particularly the mask itself and its apparent properties. The mask recovered from the construction site was subjected to extensive testing at the FBI laboratory in Quantico. The results confirmed it was made from human skin, specifically facial skin, that had been chemically treated to preserve it. Carbon dating placed its origin between 1890 and 1900, consistent with the timeline of the original Blackwood case. Most unusual, however, were the findings related to the symbols adorning its surface. Dr. Miriam Patel, an expert in ancient languages and symbols consulted by the FBI, noted similarities between these markings and those found in certain pre-Sumerian artifacts dating back to approximately 5000 BCE. What made this connection particularly significant was that the specific arrangement of symbols on the mask should not have been known to anyone in 19th century America, as the artifacts containing similar patterns had not been excavated until the 1930s. From Dr. Patel's analysis, the symbols on the mask represent what appears to be a ritualistic language designed to facilitate transition between states of being. What's remarkable is not just their presence on an artifact from 1894 America, but their precise arrangement, which follows patterns that would not be documented in accessible academic literature until nearly 40 years later. This suggests either an extraordinary coincidence, previously unknown archaeological discoveries that preceded the official ones, or some form of knowledge transmission outside conventional historical channels. As the investigation continued to uncover connections between the historical case and present-day activities, Agent Reeves became increasingly convinced that Robert Caldwell held the key to understanding the full scope of the Threshold Society's operations. Extensive searches failed to locate him, however, until a facial recognition match placed him in New Orleans in September 2021. Surveillance footage from a French Quarter hotel showed Caldwell meeting with several individuals previously identified in Martin Graves's files as suspected members of the Threshold Society. Most significant was his companion, identified as Dr. Eleanor Price, a neurologist from Boston, specializing in consciousness studies and near-death experiences. Background checks revealed that Price had been Caldwell's colleague at MIT before both relocated to the South, Caldwell to Houston and Price to New Orleans, within months of each other. A search warrant executed on Price's New Orleans residence yielded a breakthrough when investigators discovered a hidden room containing an extensive archive of Threshold Society documents dating back to the 1890s. Among these was a member registry, with dates spanning from 1895 to the present, including names, initials, and cryptic notations that appeared to track some form of progression through the Society's ranks. Most disturbing was a leather-bound volume titled The Vessels, containing detailed records of individuals apparently selected for what was described as consciousness transference procedures. The entries, dating from 1894 to as recently as 2020, included physical descriptions, occupations, locations of acquisition, and clinical notes on the results of the procedures. The most recent entry was dated June 4, 2021, just days before the discovery of the remains, at the construction site, and referred to a subject identified only as Vessel 108 from the journal entry Vessel 100, and 8 prepared according to established protocol. Initial resistance significant but manageable. Subject exhibited ideal characteristics, strong ego boundaries, vivid visualization capabilities, and high empathetic response. Mask applied within the critical 6-minute window, following cessation of vital functions. Transfer indicators positive, with consciousness mapping at 87%, our highest success rate to date. The Blackwood protocol continues to yield improvements with each iteration. We are approaching the threshold where full transfer becomes viable, potentially eliminating the need for the mask as an intermediate vessel. EB's vision, after 127 years, stands on the verge of complete realization. The great work continues. This journal entry confirmed the task force's worst fears. The Threshold Society was actively abducting individuals for use in their experiments, and these activities were continuing in the present day. The reference to EB suggested Edward Blackwood's influence extended far beyond his presumed lifespan, either through detailed documentation of his methods or through some mechanism the investigators could not yet comprehend. As the task force prepared to coordinate a nationwide operation targeting known Threshold Society members, a detective with the New Orleans Police Department, who had been assisting with surveillance, reported a strange encounter. While observing Dr. Price's residence, he had noticed a young woman in what appeared to be 19th century dress watching the house from across the street. When he approached to question her, she turned to face him, revealing what he described as features that seemed to shift and blur, as if I was seeing her through rippling water. Before he could reach her, she walked around the corner of a building and vanished. His description matched that of Clara Blackwood, based on the single surviving photograph from 1894. Similar sightings were reported by other task force members in the following days, always in proximity to locations associated with the Threshold Society. These accounts, coming from experienced law enforcement professionals with no prior knowledge of the historical case details, lent credibility to the possibility that whatever had happened to Clara Blackwood in 1894 had left something of her in a state neither fully alive nor fully dead, somehow connected to the mosque and the Society's activities. From Agent Reeves's Field Journal, September 28, 2021. The rational part of me wants to attribute these sightings to suggestion and the power of shared narrative. We've all been immersed in this case, reading the historical accounts, seeing Clara's photograph. It would be natural for our minds to construct a figure matching her description in ambiguous situations. Yet the consistency of these sightings, often by individuals with no prior knowledge of each other's experiences, suggests something more. Whether Clara exists as some form of consciousness, preserved through means we don't understand, or whether she represents something else entirely, perhaps a manifestation of the mask's properties, I cannot say with certainty. What I do know is that we are dealing with a group that believes they have discovered a method of transcending death, and they have been abducting and killing people for more than a century in pursuit of this belief. Whether or not their methods have any objective efficacy, the threat they pose is very real and immediate. The operation to apprehend known Threshold Society members was scheduled for October 30th, 2021, the day before Halloween, and, according to documents recovered from Dr. Price's residence, the date of a major Threshold Society gathering described as the culmination. In the pre-dawn hours of that day, FBI agents and local law enforcement simultaneously executed search warrants at 23 locations across 5 states. These raids resulted in the arrest of 17 individuals connected to the society and the seizure of extensive documentation, ritual paraphernalia, and chemical compounds matching those found at the Blackwood property. Dr. Price was among those arrested at a remote property in the bayous outside New Orleans, where agents discovered an underground chamber containing equipment that appeared to be designed for the same purpose as Edward Blackwood's root cellar a century earlier. 5 other individuals were taken into custody at the site, but Robert Caldwell was not among them. The most significant discovery at the New Orleans site was a collection of masks, 7 in total, each appearing identical to the one found with the remains at the Blackwood property. Preliminary analysis indicated they were all crafted from human skin using the same techniques, though they appeared to have been created at different times over the past century. Each was adorned with the same symbols, arranged in identical patterns,